I'm gonna press continue. Oh man. See, that's what exactly I didn't want to have happen. Did my camera zoom out?
Yeah, it did.
How are we looking now?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. That was weird. Make sure I turn off my ringer.
Yeah, I did that earlier. I check my phone, check my personal phone, my desk phone.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to take a few minutes just to let everybody have a chance to join, and we'll start in about 2 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the CTA workshop on security. The presenters are Stephen Medrow from Missouri DOC and Chris Covey from Barry Dunn. They will be discussing security from offenders, staff, facilities, and information points of view. Please add any questions to the Q&A box, and they will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Chris, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Of course, you caught me in the middle of a sip of water to get ready, but hey, I sure do appreciate this opportunity. Thank you again. And I want to thank CTA for this opportunity. And Russ, thank you for your well wishes. See, as Laura said, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please throw them in the Q&A box. We'll get to them at the end. And so over the last couple of months, I had the great pleasure of working with Stephen Medrow to develop this presentation. And the goal of this presentation is really just to start or continue the conversation about security and technology. So let me advance this slide here. And hey, everyone, I'm Chris.
I'm Stephen.
All right, so we're good on introductions.
There we go.
And for those of you that don't know me, I am Chris. My name is Chris Covey, and I'm a senior consultant at Barry Dunn's Government Consulting Group. At Barry Dunn, I focus on making life easier for local and state agencies. I do a lot of work as a project manager, and I also facilitate system implementation, system requirements development, and selection. I've also participated in staffing and needs assessments, and I've done a lot with organizational change management projects as well. I hold a bachelor's degree in business management and an MBA in project management. I also have my PMP certificate, and I'm also a certified change management practitioner through the ProSci Change Management Program. Whew, that was a lot to get through. Steve, I'll kick it over to you for a quick introduction.
Before we do that, I saw we had a comment pop up related to the share and the slides.
Oh, man.
And I know the slide did not advance for me, so.
Oh, man.
There's you.
You got me on that share screen thing again.
Probably.
Whew. All right. Hey, everyone. That's me again. There we go. Is that working now?
Everybody, if you can't see the share, please let us know. Throw that in the chat or in the Q&A. So in the meantime, I'll go ahead and continue. As Chris said, my name is Stephen Medro. I am currently the technology liaison for the Missouri Department of Corrections. So as my director told me once, it's not my job to necessarily do tons of the day-to-day work, but it's my job to make sure the day-to-day work can get done. So I get to remove roadblocks as I work through a lot of technology-based project management. So I've worked for the state of Missouri for over 20 years, taken the long way around to get to technology. But in the last decade or so, I've spent a lot of time working with technology in a couple of different state agencies, end user, system administration, training staff members, and in my current role, doing a lot to just help us continue moving our technology forward. So I have a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in education with an emphasis in educational technology. And I'm looking forward to going through this presentation with you and fielding any questions you have near the end. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Stephen. All right, discussion topics. Well, we're going to start off this morning talking about some of the telehealth challenges in relation to communication security that Steve has had over the last year. Then we're going to talk a little bit about drones and robots and see how they can be related to physical security. I'm going to jump in with some discussion topics related to counter drone technology and how they can fit into the physical security aspect. And then we'll take a couple minutes at the end to just kind of point out some change management opportunities and describe what that is. And then I'm going to advance the slides. So Stephen, you're up next.
All right, sounds good. So for any of us who are not incarcerated in a prison someplace, if we have a telehealth opportunity, whether it's during COVID or any other time, and you go, hey, I just need to, be on the phone with a doctor and nurse, I've got a telehealth call, I'll just hop on my phone or hop on my computer. And then you move that into a corrections situation and you realize that there is no phone, no computer that you can just hand to an offender someplace, somebody who's in prison. There's no Wi-Fi in a lot of places. We certainly don't want incarcerated folks to be on our state network here in Missouri. We have issues with infrastructure in terms of who's going to do some of this work and who's going to supervise all of these things that are taking place. So that's some of what I'm going to cover in the next couple of slides. We have had here in Missouri, we've had telehealth within our prison system for the last several years provided by our vendor. So, and as we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about how that has gone and what we're doing with all of these things. So almost all of our facilities have at least 2 units that do telehealth, one in medical, one in mental health. So in different parts of our institutions. Several facilities have more, especially some of our larger institutions that need to accommodate the needs of segregation or some kind of specialty unit. And so that's kind of where we are today. And one of the ways we got here, talking about the infrastructure, we, as I said before, we don't want to have offenders on our state network. So one of the things that had to take place in putting telehealth in was running an entirely separate network. So there's a whole separate physical network. Thankfully, it doesn't have to go everywhere in our institutions, just a couple of locations, but it did involve running new wiring, setting up the internet connections, having the vendor provide all of those things, as well as computers that are necessary for the telehealth, any of those kinds of things. So it's all hardwired connections too. We don't have Wi-Fi in our institutions because we don't want to have open Wi-Fi running around any place, or even Wi-Fi that's deemed to be pretty secure, because we don't want to take that kind of risk. All of our offenders have to be supervised. They're supervised by our contracted medical staff, and those medical staff go through full employment processes for the ones who work in the institutions, and then the ones who work for our vendor also go through a full employment process. We have some specialists that we consult with that are not necessarily employees of either the Department of Corrections or the vendor, but those are folks who work in reputable, we make sure they work for reputable organizations, hospitals, clinics, those types of things. And it's not just, somebody working out of a back office somewhere. So we want to make sure that we've got plenty of expertise handy. So one of the things that's helped us with, even pre-COVID, is helping to remove some of the barriers to offender access, especially to specialists. We have, as you can imagine, we have prisons scattered all over Missouri, and many of them are in pretty rural areas. So they're not anywhere close to a lot of specialists. So having people available via telehealth helps prevent some 5-hour drives to find somebody. So then once with all of that in place, then we come across COVID, as everybody else has. We've had issues with this. So our existing telehealth structure has certainly been a boon for us, because it has prevented the need for some of our out counts to take offenders to doctor appointments, to specialists, to anything else. So we have continued to be able to use our telehealth. And with the special circumstances of COVID, we've actually expanded our use. We did, with partnership with IT, we were able to put some additional computers on our state network, specifically for the duration of COVID, to expand the use of telehealth in there. So that also included the loan of several laptops for use by the staff to run these telehealth sessions within the prisons. So it did require us to partner with IT. It did require us to add to our tech as we expanded the program. So that was kind of how things happened during COVID. So the handy part was that we already had some of this in place. It wasn't a big surprise. We didn't have a huge heavy lift to move to telehealth, from ground zero at the beginning of COVID. So it has worked out pretty well for us. In terms of what the future holds for this one, there is implementation currently budgeted to include all of our segregation units, and then the size of the network itself is being expanded as well. And that's a brief, very brief overview of what we've done with telehealth. And this shows how we've implemented a new technology within a Department of Corrections. So the folks that I talked to get information for this presentation said that this was a lift to do this. It was a lot of work to get all this stuff in place, of making sure that we had the necessary infrastructure and security, both physical security and cybersecurity associated with that, because we had, dealing with medical information, anything along those lines.
Stephen, with that cybersecurity and stuff, you mentioned that your healthcare provider created their own network.
Yep.
How did that work?
So that one of the things that's written into our current contract is that our health provider covers all of the equipment needs. So when we determined at some point in the past that we needed telehealth in Missouri, that was part of the responsibility that we did with the vendor. Now, they would have had to work with a lot of other people to do that. They would have had to make sure that from the IT perspective, that their system and their information was secure. From the building perspective, they would have had to work with all of our folks in the prisons themselves to run wiring, if nothing else, and make sure we have power and network and everything else in the locations that's needed. And then from from the perspective of the technology itself, having the right technology to make the best use of the telehealth, and to make sure that on the other end of the phone, on the other end of the computer, that we had, people who are reputable and good at what they do, so that they can provide the good service for us.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I'm sure as we went through, there were a lot of hurdles to get past, and there's a lot of people involved, as there is for any kind of technology infrastructure that gets put in place. Any new implementation, it involves a lot of people across a lot of different disciplines, both within and outside the agency. So now that we've done this and we've looked at what potentially the future holds, the other thing we're going to talk about I'm going to talk about initially is some of the possibilities for some future tech applications within corrections. So it may be a while before we see drones and robots that look like these, although I am going to shamelessly plug things and say one of the robots on here was built by one of my kids who's doing computer science and robotics in college. So, and unfortunately, and I'm sure he would love this, it's not the giant robot on the right side of the screen. He would probably think that was really cool though.
I was going to guess it was the Mars rover, but
oh, that would be awesome too.
Yeah.
So it may be a while before we see these in like common use within departments of corrections, things like that. But like drones and things of that nature, you can, go to parks and see people, flying drones and having a good time doing that. We actually did a tour a couple of years ago of Heinz Field, where the Steelers play. And while we were there, I noticed that there was a drone inside the stadium, which then flew up and out of the stadium. So I'm sure it was not part of the official tour, but it shows that, the capabilities of a drone to be flown over longer distances and not necessarily within sight lines of the folks who are doing the flying. Although that potentially runs you afoul of, FAA rules and things like that. So due to our time constraints, and that's not what the focus is, I'm not going to go into a lot of depths on drones, legal issues, licensing, but we are going to touch on some potential use cases for drones and robots within departments of corrections, talk about counter drone technologies, and then talk a little bit more about change management as it relates to implementing new technology in the field of corrections. So the first thing I want to talk about is physical security and the use of drones and robots for that. So we can, as some of you may know, as probably most of you know, drones are an issue for contraband coming into our facilities. And Chris is going to talk more about the counter drone technology. But one of the things that drones can be used for in the initial stages of things is to do checks for things like contraband. I saw a great presentation at a CTA conference a couple of years ago, and one of the things that was discussed was exactly this, using drones to check really high shelving units, which we here in Missouri have in some of our food service areas. You can, rather than breaking out a scissor lift and having to do all the security related to that, you fly a drone around to the high shelves and see if anything is hidden there, checking rooftops, external security, perimeter inspections can potentially all be done that way. And so some of the areas that are more inaccessible can be accessed via drone technology. We could also use drones to check our infrastructure, similar to what people use for bridges now and buildings. We can fly drones around the different buildings that we have if it's easier to check that way rather than having to do ladders and scaffolding and people climbing all over stuff. If we can fly a drone around and see how our structures are doing, that would be very helpful for us. And then perimeter inspections are one of the applications for both drones and robots. I talked with the head of our construction unit a couple of years ago about this, and one of the things he talked about was having sensors that when they were triggered by like a perimeter breach or something like that, that it would automatically deploy a drone that would fly over to the spot where the perimeter breach was identified. So you had the ability to see what was happening in a very short period of time. There are also companies out there now who are developing robot technologies that would serve for security patrols. So rather than tying up a person in doing some of these kinds of repetitive tasks, we could potentially involve robots in doing these instead. So as across the country, a lot of places, a lot of departments of corrections are seeing issues with getting enough staff to do the necessary things for just to run the department. So the addition of robots could certainly be helpful for that one. And one area in particular, which I had never heard of until I was doing the research for this presentation, was robots as a service. So similar to software as a service, apparently there are companies out there that are looking into the ability to have people like us subscribe to their robot, and that would help them take care of all of the infrastructure, any maintenance issues, and it also helps with the kind of more gradual onboarding of robot technology within a Department of Corrections, because you could say, okay, well, we're going to subscribe to your robots for this facility over here. And it means that within the department, we don't have to develop all of that necessary skill and knowledge and infrastructure. We can lean on the vendor to do some of those kinds of things. So the other thing we can look at for drone technology is in the event of an escape, which hopefully we don't see happen very much. But this slide shows a picture from a search and rescue, but it shows that the use of things like infrared technology allow us to pick out people against a more natural background. So rather than sending a whole bunch of people into rough terrain at night, one possibility is to use a drone to find whoever it is who has run away, and at least let us zero in on locations and narrow the search patterns before we have to send people out. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about in relation to drones and robots is the use of facial recognition. And this has taken a lot of hits over the last few years in the public eye, which that it's a new technology, and for a lot of people, it's a pretty scary technology. So there's a lot of validity to being cautious with how we apply facial recognition. But if we could use drone and robot technology to run facial recognition on the relatively small size of people that we have within a facility, it means that the facial recognition does not have to pull from a database of millions. You're talking about a database of thousands instead, which makes your facial recognition happen faster. Some of the issues we currently see with facial recognition, and you may have seen these in the news, are inaccuracies in how faces are recognized, especially when we talk about non-white people who are looked at by facial recognition, and there's a lot of error rates currently for that. One possibility that would help both corrections and the industry as a whole would be something like a public-private partnership to improve facial recognition technology by applying it within a corrections institution. And that way we would have a closed environment, smaller numbers of people, smaller numbers of images that we would have to connect to, and improvements in the technology. So it's one way that we can both use the technology that's out there, but also help in the broader sense of improving that. So that's the main part of what I wanted to cover with drones, robots, and telehealth. So I'm going to hand this over to Chris, and he's going to talk about some counter drone technology, and then we'll hit a few high points on change management before we take our questions.
Well, thank you, Stephen. You know that the drones and robots, it's just some pretty exciting technology that's out there and stuff that we could implement. But I wanted to take a couple minutes to discuss, counter drone technology. I was at the CTA conference a couple years ago where the state of California did a great presentation on acquiring a counter drone system. And, I did a lot of research on what's out there. I'm familiar with a lot of these companies. But what I kind of wanted to talk about is, drones pose a security threat to corrections facilities. It's just that simple. There's been several news articles that document occasions of drones that have been delivering contraband into secure corrections locations. And drones can also be used to conduct surveillance, and, well, other things. But let me advance my slide here. So there are several manufacturers that are out there that offer counter drone solutions. So for this discussion, I would like to focus on detection and identity, because basically a lot of facilities know that there's a drone threat. A lot of facilities can see that, oh, look, there's a drone flying over. But what about all the ones you don't see? You know, they fly high, they have a unique signature, fly at night. There's a lot of different things. And one of the things that you can do to combat a drone threat is identify and detect that you actually have a problem. And of the different companies that are out there, the different solutions, there's a combination of all these things I got up on the screen. So we got radar, we got a radio frequency detection, visual detection, and audio detection. Radar is radar. Sends out a little wave, bounces off, does that. Radio frequency detection is more of drones that are being controlled by an operator, send off a specific radio frequency within a certain range. And there are different systems that are out there that can detect that. And then of course, you know, there's the visual detection. Set a camera up on a monitoring station, and if it comes across something that looks like a drone, it can alert you. Then there's also audio detection, because like Stephen has mentioned, I've been at several parks and outdoor facilities where you hear that bzzz, and it's not cicada season. And it's like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's a drone. So these are just different types of ways to detect it. And depending on the needs of the facility and the manufacturer, one or several options can be used for detecting and identifying drones that could be threatening your facility. So, all right, we know that there's a threat that's out there. How do we get it? How do we get this counter drone technology in place? Well, even with unlimited resources, selecting the best solution for your facility can be difficult. A good place to start in the procurement process is performing a needs assessment. All right, needs assessment. What's that? Well, during your needs assessment, you can outline the basic requirements for the potential solution. You can start by identifying the basic functional and technical requirements, such as the size of the area that needs to be monitored, the number of facilities that need to be monitored, average weather for the facility, you know, because depending on, you get a lot of rain, you get a lot of ice, it could play into a role of potential solutions. And, you know, different terrain that surrounds the facility. So once we kind of get an idea of your basic requirements, then, you know, most everyone is familiar with the request for proposal process, and each agency and department is different. So I won't go into too much detail on that, but you know, the easiest thing to do is just to have different manufacturers compete for your work or for your business. And so if you develop a request for proposal, then vendors can propose potential solution. And then once you get all those solutions that are proposed, go through the evaluation process. Your evaluation process could be different on depending on your department, agency, and state, but you know, there's a good opportunity during that solution evaluation to do demonstrations. You know, how easy is it to use, or how difficult is it to use? What vendor solution do you like more than the other? And then after the evaluation process, there's the system selection and implementation solution. So after you have everything in place that you need to consider, you got this new counter drone system, but then what? Then you have, maintenance and training. And Stephen, how many times has an office or an agency or a facility purchased a new piece of technology and said, here you go, IT, please maintain it?
Oh, and that's one of the things that, especially with third-party software and hardware, that becomes harder and harder for IT departments to manage because there's too many to keep up with. And especially if each, we have between 15 and 20 facilities, for our prisons in Missouri, and if each one kind of went their own way, you get multiple vendors, multiple sources, and it's even more for that maintenance. And so maintaining that body of knowledge, I know you're going to talk about change management, and we're going to hit that one, but I know one of the big things about change management is getting to a point where it's just part of the work. It's part of the day-to-day. It's not a project anymore. It's just part of what we do. But making sure you have the resources to continue that process. When I worked in our training department for a while, and I know one of the things people talked about is they said, "Oh, we'll train everybody right now." And I said, "Cool. What about all the new staff?" And people would sometimes be like, "Oh, well, I don't know how we're going to train all the new staff that come in." I'm like, "Well, we keep hiring people, so sooner or later we got to train all those folks too. Otherwise, you lose that body of knowledge from the people who were trained the first time around." So then you talk about your training within your department, but then also, who is, like you said, who's going to maintain this one? You buy something and ask IT to do it. IT may say, "We don't have the resources, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the time," because they're already busy doing a lot of other stuff for us. So yeah, certainly those are issues that can easily take place.
Stephen, you bring up a great point, just discussing our previous topics, the drones and robots. Okay, once you get them, who's going to maintain them? Who's going to train them? How's that process going to work? And I guess that rolls kind of right into our next topic a little bit, which, looking at the clock, we got a little bit of time to discuss on.
Oh yeah.
So change management opportunities. Stephen, what's your definition of change management?
It's really, that's just the two words. You look at this, anytime you introduce a change of any significance into an organization, it really does need to be one of those things that people understand has an impact on, in our case, on staff, on offenders, on procedures, on practices, so knowing what kind of, where these changes will have an impact and how we're going to manage our way through that one. How are we going to get all the things in place like we talked about? How are we going to do training? How are we going to have maintenance? How are we going to do the implementation? Because that's a change all by itself.
Yeah, I think when we're getting here, it's more it's not changing the processes. Well, it is kind of changing the processes. It's more creating, your awareness and desire for a change. It's okay, here's an opportunity. And Stephen, I don't know about you, but I know, however, how much fun it is when management comes down and says, "Hey, so we're going to do things differently tomorrow." Yeah, and it's without building a large campaign around a new technology, without making everyone aware of this new technology, it could be rather difficult. Basically, as the slide said, introduction to new technology is scary. I know I've been a part of organizations that have introduced new technology, and some of the personnel I worked with just absolutely refuse to use it. For example, here's a new laptop. Start taking your logs on this piece in this new document. Start using this new piece of software to accomplish your job. It's like, well, why would I do that? I got this piece of paper and pencil that works just fine. So, it's rather difficult to have a set of everyone that is just kind of used to, the current way of life. A lot of the folks that I've been working with have been, on the job for several years, and they've only seen one piece of technology, and they just get used to it and comfortable with it. So when introducing a new technology, it's scary. And if you're implementing a new robot or drone program, or you've upgraded your network to facilitate greater security for telehealth, there can be some significant challenges. The first challenge there is technology is only as good as, well, if you use it. If you spend a good chunk of taxpayer money to purchase and implement a new technology solution, and what happens if no one uses it? I like to use the example of, you can have the best security system in the world, but it only works if you turn it on.
Absolutely.
So when implementing a new solution, there needs to be a perception by the end user that the solution is adding value. And recommend that just communicating what the new technology will be doing, and just kind of relating to how this new technology will make a job easier, and that the solution is best for the organization. Stephen, you got a couple of examples of some positive and negative when it comes to that?
Well, we're actually here in Missouri, we're actually in the midst of this. We're in the middle of a 2-year project to move the remainder of our offender management system off of a mainframe system that has been around for, I think, 20 years. So we have portions that have been live for at least that long, and we're getting ready to move off that mainframe system. So we do have, like you said, there's a lot of people, this is the only technology they have seen. So having that change is going to be a challenge for them. But one of the ways to do this is, and one of the things we are going to do is, bluntly put, at some point, they're not going to have access to the mainframe one anymore. But we can manage, so one way or another, they're going to move off of this, but we can help manage the knowledge and the attitudes associated with that. We have plans for communication plans that that we've started already and will continue in terms of communicating with staff members about what the changes are. We have done implementation teams, which involve the people who are the end users. They're going to be the end users of the system. So we have involved all of these folks throughout the design, development, and implementation process. We have also just recently, I heard in a meeting just yesterday, actually, that we've identified what we're referring to as our subject matter experts. So at each of our facilities and in our 24/7 operations on every shift, we will have staff members who are very bought into the change, who are knowledgeable about the kinds of things that the changes to our offender management programs will entail, so that when you have people who are, they're the end user, it's the middle of the day, it's the middle of the night, they have questions, they say, what am I going to do? How do I do this? How do I do my work within this system? They will have people to reach out to. One of the places where we are adding value, and this has been a common complaint at this point because the system is partially implemented now, we have, for some of our staff, just doing their regular work involves logging into multiple systems, 3, 4, 5 systems in a day just to get their work done. They do assessments in one location, they do some work on offender management somewhere else, they add different notes in a different system, all depending on what they're doing. And so part of our added value is saying, okay, from the end user side of things, we're saying this is one less system you have to learn, one less system you have to use. So we're doing more things within our offender management system by, and reducing the number of systems people have to sign into. From the management side of things, part of this is infrastructure. We reduce the amount of cost to infrastructure, but the end users are going to look at that and go, well, that's really cool, but how does that help me? So when you talk about adding value, we have to add value. We have to look at how the value is added across the entire organization. It can't simply be something that one part of the organization says, hey, this is going to add value to what we do, so we should do this, if other parts of the organization are firmly convinced that it won't add value, or they can argue that it does not. The cost to value is certainly something we have to look at. So we're doing this right now, and there will be huge change management, because these are systems, like I said, they've been in place for a long time. They've been in use by a lot of people. And one of our ways we've done this is we've added a group of 4 people in addition to a project manager, and they are fully assigned. They're DOC employees, but they're fully assigned to this project. And one of the things they're doing, which I thought was a great idea, is they're taking all of or most of the tasks that people can do now in our mainframe system, and they're translating those. Say, if you did this, if you use this transaction code in our mainframe system, this is how you're going to do that in the new system. And one of the things we've talked about, and they're very good with this, they understand it's a lot of work, but one of the things they said is about it, and this is change management, this is successful change management. They said, we put a ton of work into this. People are going to use it for like 3 months and then never look at it again, because the folks who have been who've had to change systems, they'll have figured out how to do their job in the new system, and the new people who are coming in won't know any different. So they're only going to have this system in place. So they know that what they're doing has a limited shelf life of 3 to 6 months, but they also said, this is a key part of bringing people from one system to another, is to provide good instructions and good training and say, this is how you do the work you did before. And so we think that will help bring people into these new systems and help them understand why it's not going to be as bad as what some of them will fear.
Yeah, Stephen, I've been a part of a couple different implementations, and definitely getting the word out there and sharing and bragging about the advantages of the new technology is definitely key. But another thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was the importance of leadership buy-in. I remember when we were first discussing this topic, you had mentioned that you were interested in drones and robots to help out. And you discussed a little bit about the challenge it was for even opening the conversation with your leadership.
Yeah, the first time I brought it up, I was told in no uncertain terms. Somebody said, I don't want anything to do with this, and I was like, that's cool. That's totally fine. Because part of it for me, it's a reach. I mean, don't get me wrong. I look at this and I'm like, I love tech, but I also like tech that's really helpful and useful. And so you have to sometimes sell those ideas and say, hey, this is something that we could look at, and see, you're testing the water, see how it is, see what people are interested in. And if people are one of the things that we have to understand is that when people are like really hip deep in other kinds of problems, then introducing new challenges like a new technology, maybe not even on their radar at all. So certainly different, it does require that leadership buy-in as well.
Yeah, the buy-in from leadership is critical when it comes to implementing. And, there's several techniques that can help create that buy-in. One technique would be to suggest having leadership involved with the process of selection and implementation, so that they're aware of the different advantages that a new solution could come around. If we always look at rules and regulations, and then we have an understanding of, okay, here are the way things are now, and there are certain, you know, evaluations that can be done to say, okay, I can do this with a robot, I can do this with a drone, but I can't do this. Well, getting the leadership buy-in and getting the right people in place to maybe change the policy, maybe rewrite the rules of engagement, if you will, for this specific technology. And by having that leadership involvement throughout the entire course of the process is definitely key. Not saying that, you know, the department heads or those up in the high leadership positions are going to be, you know, turning wrenches or writing code, but hey, you know, I've been a part of some organizations where the big boss comes out, takes off the suit jacket, crawls underneath the truck, and starts inspecting. You know, just to get the understanding of what is going on there. So with that, I think we're going to reserve a little bit of time for questions, unless you got another quick little story you want to jump into here, Stephen. For
Now we can move on. We can move on to our questions or any Q&A that we've already got. More stories may come out of those. So.
Whew.
We do have a question about, it's two-part. They are interested in more information on counter drone technology and vendors that provide secure solutions. And then they also ask, and maybe the participants can put out there in the chat window response to this, what DOCs are currently using this type of technology and what vendor solutions are in use? So I'll turn it over to our panelists for the first question.
Well, my info is up there on the screen there. I did a rather extensive just market research. You know, my background prior to working in Barry Dunn, I was with the Department of Defense, and I got to see a lot of cool technology that may or may not be available to local and state governments. But I have been just kind of conducting this research and putting everything out together. Laura, if you had the specific name of the person, maybe you can give that to me afterwards and I can reach out and share that information. But it was a lot of research, and you know, just throwing in counter drone technology into the old Google box there, you come out with a lot of good information. There was a documentary that I watched that HBO produced. I believe a prison in Georgia was talking about their counter drone program. But you know, that's definitely something I can help out with. And so that was part one of the question. Help me out with part two.
The second part was just asking general to the audience about which DOCs out there are using technology and the drone technology, and just to get an idea of who's using the counter technology, who's not, and how they're using it. So we'll go ahead. I asked if people can put that in the chat window if they want to share. And we do have another question out there.
I'm going to jump in real quick and add something on to Chris's before we move on to another one. Talking about, like, if anybody's interested in developing the counter drone technology, I do strongly, based on what's been in the news, I do strongly recommend going through all the hoops that are required, because I know that when you start talking about, you know, interdicting the drones that are out there, there's a lot of rules about that, and I can't even explain what they all are. But you run across organizations like the FAA, who have rules about what you can and can't do in terms of interfering with drones that are out there flying around. You know, you talk about if you said, hey, well, we're just going to destroy them, that's a whole nother issue right there. You know, yes, they're being used for ill purposes, but you still want to make sure that that your organization is well covered to prevent you from getting in trouble for even for securing your perimeter. You don't want to, because this is one of those technologies that's still, from the legal side of things, fairly new. You definitely want to make sure you get some of those legal questions answered before you start shooting down drones.
Yeah, Stephen, that rolls right into the procurement part of it. Your needs assessment. What do you need and what can you do? Just having a good understanding of the laws and regulations that are in place that talk about it now. I know the FAA recently let up some of the drone restrictions, and I work with a couple great folks that have developed training programs that go through, and you can get your FAA certification to be a certified drone pilot. And when you're looking at, I know the challenges I've had trying to fly my 13-year-old son's drone. Oh man. Yeah, let's just say I've ran across a bunch of fields trying to find it. But those are the types of things that we need to consider. The training aspect of it. Who's going to do it? How do we do it? And there's just, it would be super easy just to go, okay, I'll just go grab this and start using it. But then you start running into problems. It's planning and the process of acquiring this technology. And there are, sometimes, Stephen, I know it's been difficult to acquire this type of technology. And what kind of recommendations would you have for those that are starting the process?
I think that what the second part of that first question is a huge part of this, is to lean on the experience that other people have had. That way we don't have to, if you're looking at this, you don't have to build this up from nothing. You want to lean on what other people have done. And I'm sure that there are, since we tend to be government agencies, you're starting to look at, other connections within government. You can look at like your offices of administration, legal aspects, connections that may exist with places like the FAA. But anything associated with those, doing the research at the beginning will probably save you lots and lots of time and heartache and headache along the way, and potentially money, because some will depend also on like where you're located may have an impact on what you can do. So doing that kind of research is going to be a big part of getting started, in terms of doing this. But yeah, definitely do the research, take the time, do the research. Don't shoot yourself in the foot with that kind of thing. So what was our next question then, Laura?
Yeah, Laura, we got a bunch of questions there. And I also
Yes.
saw one that came through in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, I got it. The next one, we have terrific presentation to start off the second day of CTA. Thank you so much to both Stephen and Chris for an awesome set of topics impacting corrections and technology. Can you discuss a bit regarding how our younger workforce expects to have better technology in the workplace today and their acceptance of new technology versus the older generation?
Ooh, that's a good one there.
That is fun. I relate that to, when everything shut down this last year, and my son, my 13-year-old son, had to transition to remote school, and how his generation is raised on technology. Having the video game controller or having the YouTube in front of his face all the time. So for him, screen time wasn't a problem. It was an easier transition than I know I would have had, especially with the access to it, and with the newer generation, if you will. It's kind of expected. That this new technology is kind of expected. And Stephen, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways too, so much of it depends on what people's background is. You know, there's a lot to, you know, like Chris, what you said, you know, people are used to having, you know, their phone in front of them and, you know, being able to look stuff up on YouTube and that kind of thing. But sometimes that also doesn't translate into using that technology in a workplace setting. And conversely, you may have people who've been in the workforce for a long time who are also bought into the use of technology, you know, who say, yeah, I'm into it. I'm up on the current, you know, I have all the current software, I have the current, you know, all the current tech that's out there. So I think while there is an expectation that we have decent technology in our, you know, in our facilities and in our organizations, that can bridge across generations too, because you may also have people who have not been exposed heavily to current technologies. In looking at broadband kinds of things, there's like 25% of households only have internet access on a phone. So that probably means they don't have a computer. You know, a lot of households don't. A lot of people don't have a computer sitting in their home because there's nothing to connect it to. And they may not see a need for it. So depending on like where people were brought up and what kinds of background they have, they may or may not have a lot of exposure to technology. I think that some of the big divides in kind of just from what I've seen and from what I can logic through would be, you know, if you say, hey, we've got this like web-based platform, it's kind of old, people be like, oh, that's fine, it's just a little outdated, you know. Whereas if you start moving into things like mainframe systems, you know, we still run a lot of our stuff on green screen systems and stuff like that. I think that's a bigger gap for people because those are things that they've never seen. You know, they come to an organization like ours and they go, I have no idea what that is, because they will have literally never seen it before in their lives, because that's a technology bridge that they have to get across. So modernizing systems, even with limited modernization, I think can be very helpful as we look at some of those generational issues. I know one of the big pushes for us to move off of a mainframe system is that in discussions with our IT folks, they don't have anybody coming in who can program. You know, they don't know the programming languages. And I said, well, you know, being devil's advocate, but I asked one of our guys one time, I said, well, can't they learn? You know, it's programming, can't they figure it out? And he's like, yeah, but I would have to retrain every single new person who came in. It wouldn't be like saying, oh, this is just a variation. It's like, this is something you have never seen before in your life, and we need you to be able to program in this. And he said, that's a huge lift to try and get people trained up in those areas. And so I think that's one of the important parts of continuing with IT modernization, is simply keeping it within that broader sense of familiarity. You know, like I said, a Windows or a, you know, web-based platform that's old is still more recognizable than a technology that, you know, you get somebody in and you say, here, we'd like you to use this system that we implemented before you were born. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never done this before. It's totally foreign to them. So I think that's one of the issues we have to address.
All right, I think we got just a couple minutes. I'm going to try for one more question here. This
Sure.
one's for Stephen. And they're asking, are mobile devices used for day-to-day business in Missouri? Is there no Wi-Fi? How are they connected to state and network for synchronization?
So within our prison system, we are not. You know, there's not a use of wireless devices at this point. You know, it's been one of those things that's come up in the last several years. We've talked about it several times, just in terms of what the possibilities would be. You know, we talked about issues of you know, count, you know, recording like head counts and stuff like that, using things like QR codes on the outside of cells, because it also helps to improve accountability. You know, did your staff actually go to the cell? Well, if they didn't scan a QR code, then no, they didn't go there. So there are a lot of technology hurdles to those kinds of things. We are using more mobile technology with our probation and parole side. They are, because to help them be out in the community more. And this was one of those things we implemented more heavily with the onset of COVID, as we did, push our probation, excuse me, our probation and parole staff out into the community a lot more, and provided them with cell phones and laptops to make sure that they could do their work out in the community. And like the cell phones they have the ability to be a hotspot, so they can connect their laptop to it and do their work right there on the spot. So that way they can do more with that. So within our prisons, really nothing. We've looked at it, we've talked about it. We haven't gone there yet. We have a couple of possibilities, in the future of some closer reach kind of applications, but nothing that we have done any implementation with now. More in the community side of things to help staff members still be able to do their work and be mobile.
Well, we're just about out of time. I really want to thank both Chris and Stephen for an excellent presentation. It was very interesting, and the exhibition hall is now open, or at least in about a minute. So please feel free to visit them and join us in about an hour for Digitation is the New Normal. Thank you all.
Thank you.